Assalamu alaikum. Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit, Amal?
Sure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Amal. It means hope in Arabic. And I'm a Syrian American poet based in the United States. My father is a Syrian Arab man. My mother is an American convert. And so I come from two worlds belonging to neither and really dwelling in the cracks, which ultimately means humanity, making that my culture. And I'm so excited to be here today with my very, very first collection, Scud Missile Blues, which was quite a tumultuous journey to write, that's for sure. And its arrival, the birth of it was very underwhelming. And so it's a privilege to be celebrating with Lote Tree Press.
Alhamdulillah, I'm really glad to have you here. And I really enjoyed reading this earlier today, although I have to say it is quite a harrowing read.
Certainly.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book and how you came to write it and the process of writing it?
Yeah. I began this book in the spirit of what was a revolution in Syria. And that, as I mentioned before, is my father's homeland. And I was in the United States. I would say I was 16 when the revolution started. And as a Muslim in America who experienced September 11th, who kind of had to forage her identity in the midst of I would say, privileged oppression. You know, there's flavors to our oppression, and to have grown up in Islamophobia, but then to witness violence and war and army tanks overseas, it created a more well-rounded approach to my activism. And so this book, I began it with a spirit of hope. And what makes it such a journey of a book is, as I was writing it, my identity as an activist, my hope in the world was also developing. So when you look at the early poems, it was very romantic, very hopeful. If you look at some of my early poetry performances on YouTube, I am a very loud and red-faced and intense youth, and there is a lot of anger fused with hope and passion. But as the book went on, my family, we have lost 49 members to this war, ranging from bombings to starvation to detention centers, and with every death became almost a new interpretation of life. And there was a moment in the book, and as you read it, it was so hard to put it out there because my name means hope, but there was a point in this book where I had no hope left, and there is emptiness on the pages. You know, there's nothing but a veto or a word of a politician. And I think that documenting the metamorphosis of my understanding of what it really takes to see a war through, I think that was a really important journey, because I thought when I would finish the book, there would be peace and that it would be done and there was conclusivity. But subhanAllah, there is no conclusivity to these things. And that's what made it such a challenging book to write. But I think a really honest one as well.
And what's the situation in Syria now? Because it's been going on for how many years? Like 13 or 14 or something?
Yeah, it began 2011. We are in the 13th year of the conflict, with over 9 million of the original 22 million population that was displaced. In the refugee crisis, really, it was Syria. If we all remember, it really put a lot of conversation into the Western world. And so the refugee crisis still is as it is. There are still refugee camps where human beings are living there, where at this point, we're probably 2 generations in. Inside of the country, they also experienced that devastating earthquake. I believe that was of last year, which further impacted the internally displaced people. At this point, the cost of bread, the cost of gasoline is so outrageously high. Employment is challenging. There is still bombings that are taking place in certain rebel-held areas like Idlib. You can have the mask of the capital, if to reference Hunger Games in Damascus. And for those who have been able to return, it is a population of those who have wealth living in the city, trying to live as normal as possible. While in the outskirts, the buildings have not been rebuilt yet. And so the war is actively there, and the climate crisis is putting a whole new layer into the everyday reality as well. So the situation is not that of a peaceful ended war, to say the least.
Yeah. I did actually visit Damascus. I spent about a week there when I was 15.
Oh.
Yeah, we were living in Jordan at the time.
That's
and
amazing.
we visited some friends. So
it's beautiful, right? It was beautiful.
Yeah, at that time there was no war or anything, so it was very beautiful. Yeah.
Yes. It was considered the international language hub of the world. People would go there to learn Arabic and the sacred traditions. I mean, they say Ghazali passed through here.
Yeah, it was one of the great cities, wasn't it?
Yes.
Mashallah. Okay, well, shall we start with a poem, do you think?
Yes,
yeah.
I'd love to.
Do you want to start maybe with Paper Aeroplanes?
Sure.
Yeah.
I chose Paper Airplanes as the first poem of the book because it was a reminder, mostly to myself. Certainly the audience is being spoken to here, but at a certain point, the book became a conversation with myself and my inner activist and my inner hope. And to remember who really holds the future, I think is a great way to believe that there is something more to come. And I read this poem in the context of the children of Gaza, the children of Sudan, the children in Congo, and the list goes on, of course. Bismillah. Bombs blasted Aleppo, so the children turned the craters into swimming pools. After burning tanks extinguished, they tied ropes to the turrets and they built swings. These kids know empty soda bottles kick better than popped soccer balls. Dirty water mixed with dust makes finger paint, and shrapnel is much shinier than macaroni art. Busted bricks build better forts than cushions, and burning tires guarantee that you will win hide and seek with the airplanes. These children do not fear the echoes. They play tag in them. They can tell the dialect of rockets, regime or Russian, American or European. They calculate the distance of missiles like clapping between thunder in a storm. Children of war are engineers, mathematicians of the aftermath, architects of reconstruction, repurposing abandoned bunkers into classrooms, cemeteries into museums, fallen buildings into toy boxes. They are the strongest military in the war zone, retaliating with imagination, occupying what's desolate with laughter. Bombs don't stop their play. these children turn war declarations into paper airplanes.
How do you feel that the children are dealing with it? I mean, it's a whole generation that have grown up like this. Do you think they're dealing well with it? Or, I mean, it's...
Yeah. I did a lot of research in my undergraduate career in university, specifically on the trauma of children. And the studies show there's a few factors here. Number one, the younger they are, the better off they will be. Children in their adolescence, when they already have an understanding of the world and who they are and their relationships with their family and their parents, oftentimes the war impacts them in a really remarkable way compared to the youngers. Now, I do want to note that trauma is trauma, and what the children have gone through, there are cases indeed that are worse than others, but overwhelmingly the resilience is profound. And during times of war, you see something really incredible happen. And this is the war you see in the impoverished streets of the United States. These are the wars you see of hunger, the wars you see of bombs and weapons like in Gaza and Syria. You see community develop. And the village really comes together during these times. There were stories in Syria of women, elderly women in their 90s, who were taking care of like 15 orphans. There was one story in particular, she was inside of a cave and just taking care of orphans. And this community dynamic is the it factor that is the difference between a child who will grow up with some serious unhealed wounds and a child who will grow up with some true resilience. Wounded nonetheless, but with the capacity to heal. And so overall, because of the community factor, I think, alhamdulillah, we're witnessing it in all these videos we're watching. As long as we grieve each other, as long as we share the little scraps of food that we have, and as long as we take care of especially the children, the orphans that are roaming with no parents, they have a shot. And that is how Allah created us.
Yeah. What about, would you like to read the poem Taxi Driver?
Sure. This was such a wonderful poem to write because it gave me the chance to... The idea of the poem was inspired actually in my, it was a developmental psychology class, and they were talking about this part of the brain called the hippocampus that is spatial, right? So, and they specified that the taxi driver has a larger part of his hippocampus than the average person because of the amount of like spatial informations and routes and paths and things like that they absorb. And it made me think of the taxi driver you see, you know, in New York City who has Quran playing on his radio, and all the taxi drivers that I met in Lebanon and Syria, and how essential they are truly to keeping the nation alive. So one cannot tell the difference between a map of Damascus and a taxi driver's synapses. He charts every shortcut in the folds of his memory. He places each city center in a different cortex. The country's circuitry is in his brainstem. He can navigate the nation even when the lights go out and the fires disperse and the smoke spreads and the protesters roar and the bellies empty and the war starts again. He knows the marketplaces and the government hospitals. the embassies and police stations, the checkpoints and fences. He knows the masajid that have the most packed janaza, where to take the detainee when he is freed, where to take the child when he is orphaned. He knows what is meant by safe passage, and he is prepared for every detour. He stores gauze in the glove, a handgun under his seat, a cedar tree mesbaha around the rear view, while Quran plays on the radio, pistachios in his cup holder. His gustatory cells and cochlea hold the key. His synapses can't be leveled. Despite the bulldozers and barrel bombs, the nation is preserved in his mind. This is a country, not a map. The only borders the taxi driver knows are the ones that divide the lanes.
That's wonderful, mashallah. It did actually take me back to a slightly crazy taxi drive in Damascus. I think they're quite wild drivers.
You really have to trust your taxi driver. You have to trust God.
Yeah.
It's great for tawakkul.
Yeah. And the cars in Damascus are all really old, aren't they? Because they haven't imported.
I imagine that's changed now.
It probably has, yeah.
You know, especially because there's a big base of like there's a big Russian presence, a big Irani presence, a lot more wealth inside the city. But you'll see a BMW here and there, but it's all those like
I was there a very long time ago. So
Japanese Suzukis, you know.
Yeah.
Or like the family of 8 on a motorcycle. That was a very common occurrence.
Yeah. Okay, could you read The Journalist?
Yes. It's profound, especially now as we witness what's happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
But in our modern age, as technology has made itself present, the journalist, the eyewitness testimony is the most fundamental. And I almost want to say, this is where the most like important virtue can be found in the entire world, because we're dealing right now with the difference between a truth and a lie, which is seemingly so small. But when you have Netanyahu speaking in America's Congress, blatantly lying, there is a verse in Islam that says, they will lie until it is written in the universe, in the stars, and directly to God that they are liars. And the truth of what someone saw, especially in war, when there are global actors, is more important than anything that we are facing right now. You know, they wouldn't lie unless the truth was a problem. And so when we go back to the early part of the revolution, it was not an armed conflict. The first thing that was asked for by activists was send us cameras. Send us cameras. Let us document this, because if the world could see what was happening, perhaps then they would act. So this is inspired by those individuals who are still very much present today. The journalist keeps his passport in his bulletproof vest, stores his equipment in a body bag, and bodies in his camera, alongside the mass graves, the bombs, the detainees, the casualty counts, and the ones that killed, alongside the cachectic and the king, the coffins and the throne, the traitors, the targets, the guns, the gauze, the ghosts, dead doves, a lion. The journalist carries diaries with the dying's last wish, the killer's nightmares, the soldier's dreams, the family trees, the burning farms, aid envoys and army tanks, prison shackles and gold grenade rings. The journalist crams his war with camera, lens cracking, skulls pressing against the glass, overflowing on TV sets. Breaking news. The news broke.
And that could also almost be about Gaza, couldn't it? With all the journalists. No.
The imagery of war is the same.
Yeah.
The bombs just seem to explode a little differently depending on who's supplying the weapons.
Mm.
Yeah.
And Syria is very complicated, isn't it? I like it's hard to really even understand what's going on a lot of the time.
Yes. And it's so sticky, I think also because of like the political alliance. And you know, I remember the most challenging part was reconciling the idea of like, who is the smaller of the two devils? That was a huge factor. And I would be sitting at tables having meals with people who would say, well, you know, America or Russia, you know, like who would you pick? And that was a very challenging question, because when it comes down to it, we're living in a world, we're living in a global two-party system where we always feel we have to pick, you know. And I don't think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I don't think God on the day of judgment judges by the party, by the lesser of the two evils. And I had to ensure that I could reconcile my political point of view to align with human rights and not with politics and geography, because at the end of the day, to be pro-Palestine is to be more pro-Russia than to be pro-American, or to be pro-this versus pro-that. But then you look at the death count in the footprints of all these tyrannical countries who are all doing business with the same weapons manufacturers, and it creates a lot of hostility among people. And I think that politics is one of the most the ways we can dehumanize ourselves the most, because it's about winning, you know, it's about voting, it's about picking who the bigger devil is, and that's all conjecture, you know. So you're very right when you say that this is very messy. And yeah, it gets so political. It's so gross. Yeah. But it is important to be able to have both these conversations, because of, especially to our young activists who are out there, I learned very quickly in my career as an activist that you will be humbled, and what you think is true about the world may very well not be. This is not black and white, you know.
Could you read Nurse?
Yes. Let's see. Where are you, dear nurse?
Page 27.
Perfect. Fluorescent flickers and running feet, like the August before the war. Now curfewed electricity and blood-stained tile. Her fingertips, once coated in chalk, dust concrete powder from the children's hair. And her hands, once wrapped around rulers, wrap gauze around children's limbs. Once dotting that and that, crossing T's and X's, now stitching wounds shut with black thread, passing out towels like graded tests, collecting bandages with red ink, students on desks instead of in them, pushed together for hospital beds. She instructs widows to steady their shaky needles, critiquing their sutures like cursive, hushing hysteric fathers like class clowns, sending mothers out of the room like distractions. Her classroom is an ER, an emergency room. Self-taught medic, certified by necessity. She keeps inventory on the back of her teaching license. Left literature for medicine labels, pencils for scalpels, report card death certificates. Bombings sound the bell. Corpses wearing name tags in single file. A teacher's work never ends.
Was that from a particular incident or?
Yeah, it was very common to see makeshift hospitals in Syria when the bombings increased. And one of the places was schools. And I mean, I don't know if irony is the word. They thought, okay, if the hospitals keep getting bombed and aren't safe, maybe the schools will be safe. Which of course we know it's a free-for-all, but this was inspired by the stories of many women who went from really just average jobs, mothers who became medics, teachers primarily, especially because of the space, the location. They knew these buildings, and therefore they could host the doctors, and they could bring the people in, and they just became medical providers in a space that commanded they do so. And you see this
huge numbers of hospitals were bombed.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
A devastating amount.
And why was that? I mean, it seemed that's another thing that's happening in Gaza. It seems so strange.
SubhanAllah, in Gaza, I think that with what's happening in Palestine, it really is Operation Level It Down for the real estate project that's coming up next. And in Syria, it is something similar. The thing is, the people would not stop protesting in a lot of cases. There came a point where they did. But at this point, you had a conflict where individuals were armed at that point. So to just give a little context, Syria was a peaceful revolution until about 9 months. And then members of the military themselves decided they did not want to continue killing civilians by the military order. And so they defected and created an armed resistance. So that's how it happened. It happened on the higher up on an authority level. But it was like the whole human shields thing. We're going to attack the civilians unless you comply. And so they were attacking all of these spaces. But interestingly, there are huge rebuilding construction contracts with China that were signed very early on. So there was never going to be a problem with like blowing everything up and putting everything ground zero, because there are contracts. There are look at that. That's not a thumbs up moment. There are contracts, and Chinese construction companies are ready to start rebuilding. You already have the same thing in Gaza. Real estate companies or construction companies are ready to come in and rebuild, and this is just the easy way to do it.
And so through your book, you have these vetoes from China and Russia.
Yeah. They are the most vested investors, you could say, in this conflict, and it's all political and business. There's something called there's a rebuilding of the Silk Road taking place right now, all the way from China through Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, through Syria, all the way up. And it's a project, it's called the Belt and Road Initiative by China to rebuild the Silk Road. And it's interesting that every single one of those countries has a devastating war on it, but Syria is included on the path of the Silk Road. So there's a business investment, and that usually I always say follow the money. The politics is so ideological, it's so abstract. It really ruffles our feathers, but it's not empirical, it's not tangible. But when you follow the dollars and the corporations, that's really, I think, where we are dealing with black and white. That is where the truth can be found, is in money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you just on the next page read heavy weapons? It's very short, but I thought it was quite a profound one.
The weapons are nowhere near as heavy as the suitcases of our fleeing grandmothers.
And from there, do you want to just say a bit about the refugees and just the fact that so many people have had to leave?
Yeah. You know, they have this common question. If your house was burning down, what would you grab in an emergency situation if you had to leave? And you saw, like, for a certain individual, there's a difference. My family, alhamdulillah, they were an upper middle class family. They had property, they were able to purchase flights. Some of them were able to leave the country and go live somewhere else. But for many others who lived day to day, I mean, there was a lot of poverty in this country, just simply because of the way the political system and employment system was structured. And so there was no option on resettling in another country. You were at the mercy of the feet that could walk you into another place. And the refugee crisis was so devastating because when they did interviews, I mean, we're talking millions and millions of people who had to leave the country very quickly, which we know in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan, I mean, that is a chaotic thing to have to deal with as a host country. But when they interviewed these millions of people, I mean, overwhelmingly, they said that the reason that they left was because of the bombs. If the bombs had stopped, they would have shelter. They could have peace of mind. They could continue in their life. But because of the bombings, and activists were advocating very simply for a no-fly zone for, I would say, the duration of this war. If the bombs had stopped, I strongly believe that the refugee crisis would not have been what it was. And so there was a scramble, even for my own grandmother, who had to pack up and leave. And no one was safe, especially if you were associated with anyone who was an activist or any young man who refused to fight in the military, which was commanding they kill civilians. And so you have these stories of people who were able to pack up and leave, and then their whole villages were bombed. And then you have stories of people who could not pack up, but had to literally escape with nothing but the dusty clothes on their back, you know. And we see this also in Gaza. And it's devastating because what are our things? What becomes precious in those moments except for your life itself? And there's a lot of artists who went and did these projects where they like collected things from the rubble that people held on to, cats, birds, family papers, documents is always something that is probably the first thing that most Arabs, most people in these environments would grab is your papers. And how do you wrap a lifetime into a suitcase? You know, there's so much to be said about the refugee crisis, but as we know, if you're about to get onto a raft in the middle of the Mediterranean in the middle of the night, the likelihood is you're not carrying a suitcase filled with old memories of your life. You probably only have what is absolutely essential for you to live to the next day. Yeah.
Do you want to read Raqqa on page 44?
I'd love to read Rafa. That was actually one of the poems that I was most uncertain about. I was
Oh,
like,
really? Mhm.
and the reason is, as you know, to be honest, Rabia, as we're going through this, truthfully, this is one of the first few times that I've actually been able to talk about the book and recollect the book.
Mm.
It was uncomfortable to put this out because it's so loaded. I can't just answer one of your questions simply without giving like an entire like textbook of context. And it's so hard to simplify something that is just so dirty and complex.
Mm.
And with Raqqa, it was so political, it was sassy, and I made a very deliberate decision that I was not going to make this book focused on ISIS. When that was the primary narrative that the West chose to steer the entire war in Syria.
Mhm.
So this is one of the poems, the only poems that I actually reference the Black Flag for this reason. And it's my biggest insecurity with this piece, I think, was that the sassiness of it, the sarcasm of it, the wittiness of it would not take away from the reality that this is devastatingly complex.
Mhm.
Because these are easy opinions to have without context, you know,
Yeah.
which is a little bit that we know, but I'm ready to read it.
Okay.
Raqqa. And just for context, this was considered the capital of the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. And it's in the desert area, interestingly, with a lot of oil nearby. Black flags, come quick, everyone. The ophthalmologist needs your help. So Russia and China and Iran ran to help. And America and Europe and Israel ran to help. Allyship to defeat the group of half-trained bearded boys in a gang bumping into each other shouting, Allahu Akbar. Black flags, save Raqqa, come quick, everyone. So the first world saviors came quick, bombed quick, kept accidentally bombing civilians instead of the gang's headquarters, even though the headquarters had black flags like neon signs, cameras with red eyes, men shouting bluebird messengers telling Twitter, here we are, here we are. Maybe the first world saviors went to a bad ophthalmologist, bad vision, kept bombing civilians in Syria's west and north and south. Maybe their tactical ballistic weapons aren't so tactical at all. It must be difficult to find the men in the east who happen to reside upon the oil fields. In an effort to protect democracy, they bombed everything, followed the presidential path searching for a Raqqa to save. Maybe they could save Raqqa by bombing civilian neighborhoods, maybe. Or hospitals, maybe. Schools, maybe. Other cities, maybe. The first world saviors flattened landscapes for easy access to find the men they declared war on, the men more dangerous to human rights than the lion's mass slaughter, proxying the exodus even though no one wanted the refugees. It was the first time I read that out loud.
I mean, for me, Syria was a kind of mystery. Even when I tried to understand what was going on, it was so like complicated. So many different parties seemed to be involved.
Yes.
So it was interesting reading the book from your perspective to sort of, it did make it a little bit clearer for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clear that it's so messy and not clear, perhaps.
Yeah.
One thing I love to mention to everyone is there is documented evidence that the Assad regime was buying oil from ISIS, which is so much irony in that. There is also documented evidence that the ISIS was purchasing US weapons on the black market. So the very people fighting each other were exchanging resources with each other. and again, here we go with follow the money. Because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, yeah, we're enemies, but as long as we can make an exchange financially, maybe we're not so on the other side.
Mm.
It's quite strange. Yes.
How about, could you read Home is Where Your Mother Is on page 53?
Back to humanity, everyone. The politics is the ickiest part. There are many versions of this poem that exist. But this one I dedicate to my grandmother and to all the mothers, really. Home is where your mother is. But home wore grapevines on her ring finger and married the land that gifted her with harvests. Farms and forests are part of the bloodline. A burnt down tree is a casualty of war. The same heartache as a grandchild's janaza. Home is where your mother is. But my father's mother disagrees. His mother packs scraps of Syria into suitcases, wrinkling remnants of Damascus and Hamuria, learning that a lifetime won't fit in a suitcase. 8 daughters won't fit in a suitcase. Home is not where our mother is. Home is not an interrogation room, a sidewalk to sleep in December, a border crossing in Europe, a raft on the sea, a burnt down tent city, a checkpoint, a dungeon, a grave. Home is not where our mothers are. The mothers with heaven underfoot have gone. Who else can turn this land into paradise?
That's a lovely one, mashallah.
Thank you.
Very moving. How about Insomnia on page 68?
I would say this poem mirrors a time that this chapter, in fact, I would say was the darkest and the lowest and the most hopeless time for a lot of Syrians all over the world, both inside Syria and the activists in the West, very much. So I'll preface with that, and you'll understand why. Insomnia. Nightmares breathing in the ears of the tossing and the turning. Bombs barking like dogs all night. Ghosts laughing in the streets. They slaughtered all the livestock so no one can count sheep. The babies won't stop crying. Fathers grind their teeth. Mothers try to lullaby everyone to sleep, but their voices are washed away by showers of bullets, by the neighbors who weep. The farshe is soaked red. Blankets used to wrap the dead. No one has slept in weeks. Everyone on edge. Please stop this insomnia. This was a scary piece to imagine, because I had to reconcile something about the human nature. And interestingly, the relationship of husbands and wives during times of high stress, you tend to see a lot more domestic violence. You tend to see a lot more fighting and aggression and meanness. And in an ideal world, we hope that when we're all suffering, that we can really be kind to each other and to all those suffering. But when you haven't slept in days, and the kid won't stop crying, and the bombs won't let you sleep, and the wife is freaking out, and the husband is at edge, and no one has eaten, there's like this primal dehumanization, like this part of us that comes out that is not gentle, it's not kind, and it's when I have a rough night sleeping, I am a grumpy woman, you know, and this poem required me to enter into the imagination of a society that was undergoing such difficult physiological realities outside of everything else that they're dealing with. It was heavy to write for sure.
Yeah, and it must, I mean, you lost a huge number of relatives, didn't you, over the course of the war?
Yeah.
That must have been very, very difficult for you.
Yeah, my father, he could not go back. That was not an option for him. He was an activist. He was making sure that, you know, he was part of like helping medicine go in, helping lambs and sheep from Jordan be smuggled in so people could eat them. You know, it was dangerous, life-saving work. And for him, I witnessed my father literally, in fact, the line in this poem, fathers grind their teeth. My father used to stay awake every night. Every night, I could hear him in our comfortable suburban American life, watching video after video after video of everything that came out, almost as like his duty to endure with his eyes what his people are enduring. And he grinded his teeth down from the stress all the way to his gums. And the dentist was like, we've never seen this before, you know, like the amount of stress that my father from far away outside the war chose to absorb in solidarity with his people was also devastating. You know, obviously not comparable when bombs are falling on top of your house, but it weighed heavy on my father. And I think more so than it could have on any of his children who grew up and were born in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to read Customs? It's on page 73.
Yes. Page 73. In this farmer's hands, scars like tree rings on his tree trunk skin, once wrapped around shovels, now wrap suitcase tags void of a home address. In his right hand, a leather briefcase, a palm of blisters, a Parkinson's tremor, a bag of bread from the barrel-bombed bakery. In his left hand, wet papers leaking blue ink, a falcon facing west, a silver ring on his forehead, no wife to lace fingers with, no granddaughter to hold. He never used pens until this war. No calluses where he signs for citizenship to somewhere else. Nothing is natural about this naturalization. And that's the story of an immigrant, not necessarily a refugee, but someone who had the privilege of being able to go elsewhere.
Yeah. We've just got about 10 minutes left. So are there any other poems that you really wanted to read?
I'd imagine something hopeful might be good for the heart.
Yeah.
the story ends at a bit of a grim place, but if for the one who knows there must be more to the story, there is a 7th section kind of hidden in the back. And I would say maybe there's actually a poem called Broken Arabic that came as sort of a follow-up to this this collection. And I think it'll be probably the first poem in my next collection. And I chose not to put this poem. I think I only used the word I maybe twice in this book because I did not feel like it was my story. But in the name of hope, this is a poem called Broken Arabic. And I dedicate it to all of those who are not able to be in the places where their hearts grieve for. And yet they have found a way to connect to the God of all things and small things through their prayer. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Arabiti maksura. My Arabic is so broken, like cracked teeth when you bite down on an olive pit too hard, like shattered tea glass, bursting chestnuts, bombed buildings. When I speak my Arabic, I am tongue-tied, tangled necklaces, stutters and mutters and sorries, the hat getting stuck in my throat like a gasping cat trying to escape the rubble. My 2nd grade vocabulary tumbles down with the minarets. My Arabic is broken. A nation at war. The heart of a grieving mother whose grandchild hasn't called in years. When a Russian missile hit my aunt's house in Syria, my Arabic collapsed with the building on her body. And when they pulled it out, it was unrecognizable, mangled. I didn't have any alphabet left to pay my condolences. I thought that my English was too cheap, a counterfeit currency. And so I decided that day all I could afford was silence. And so I said nothing in every language that I knew. It took me 5 years to write this poem. Here I am, rummaging through the rubble of my father's tongue, trying with the mouth of an infant to articulate from scratch, to untangle these necklaces jimle by jimle, sentence by sentence. ما بعرف شلون بس هحاول. I don't know how, but I'm gonna try. I'm gonna learn to give my condolences to every nation on this earth, from Syria to Sudan, from El Salvador to Seattle. I'm gonna use my shrapnel Arabic, my loose change English, whatever I have to pay my condolences. Because I have learned that silence costs so much more. Arabiti maksura. My Arabic is so broken, like cracked teeth when you bite down on an olive pit too hard. But I will keep trying, even if all my teeth are broken. Thank you.
Mashallah, that one's really, really powerful.
Allah khair.
Is it okay? Can we just ask if anyone wants to ask you questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
My favorite part.
So if anyone wants to ask a question, either in the messages or you can just unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Just wanted to say, first of all, the poetry was amazing. Alhamdulillah, I'm glad I was able to attend this session. Thank you for reading. I just wanted to know when the book is out, because I went on the website and it just said to pre-order. So I was just wondering when it's going to be released.
It is available on Amazon at this point, and I'm going to be updating that very soon. So thank you for reminding me.
Thank you very much.
Alhamdulillah.
Oh, we've got a new message. Let me just check. Sonia says, always such a joy to listen to you, Amal. Love you and can't wait to purchase, inshallah.
Sonia.
And Aina, is the finished book any different from what you had in mind when you were still writing it? Also, when and how did you decide the book was complete?
What a loaded question, let me tell you. The book is absolutely not what I imagined it would be. I mentioned a little earlier on that in an ideal world, it was going to start with revolution and hope, exposing the dictator and the war crimes, and then there was going to be peace and joy on the other side, and everyone was going to live happily ever after. But indeed, that's not how the story goes. And so what was supposed to be a chronological story of a revolution succeeding became a spectrum of just the human emotional and spiritual state when it comes to the battles that we must fight. And the book's in chronological order, sure, to the best of its ability. And it does stretch way into the Day of Judgment at a certain point. But it became a story about hope, not a story about Syria by the end of it. So, and when did I know, how did I know that the book was completed? I bet you this book was done maybe 2-3 years ago. It probably could have been finished. And I don't know what I was waiting for. To be honest, in my own personal world, I had to fight many wars of my own that were separate to the bombs falling in my fatherland. And I think that I had to fight some of my own battles before I felt safe enough to allow the fact that these battles might be battles we fight for the rest of our lives. And so Amal, the person, and then Amal, the person documenting this book about a war overseas, they both had journeys going side by side. And I think any poet will tell you sometimes you just have to decide the book is done. It's never really done. Nothing is done. But sometimes you just gotta say it's done. So
yeah. And then Jasania says, what is next for you after this book and all the work you've done in this community? What is your new direction?
Oh, what a lovely question. Well, you know, it's an interesting role as a woman who really tried to heal a broken world. And right now in my personal life, I'm transitioning into a state of motherhood, actually. And I realized that we can do our best to heal the broken world, and it is our duty to continue to do so. But I'm on a path now where I will teach healing from day one, and inshallah make it so that the tools are available to remedy the brokenness that may come, rather than fixing this pile of rubble that is before us. So I think with motherhood, I'm trying to nurture and do more healing in myself and nurturing through this child and my family. And I'm also dabbling in essays now. I decided that, I don't know if you can tell, but I talk a lot more than I read poems. So I think we need to translate this into the genre of creative nonfiction. So I don't know what's next exactly, but motherhood and essays are certainly on the table, inshallah.
Well, thank you so much, Amal. It's been amazing having you on. I've
Yes.
really, really enjoyed both your poems and everything that you've told us about the situation there.
Rabia, thank you for this opportunity. I've been a huge, huge fan of Lote Tree Press. You are actually the first time I was ever published in my life, which is a
Good.
big deal. And thank you for this space. It means a lot to me as I depart into the next phase of my journey. So thank you for hosting me and allowing me the space with your beautiful community.
Good. Alhamdulillah. Oh, also, what's happening with House of Amal now? Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Alhamdulillah, House of Amal is, I really created the very thing that I would have needed as I was growing up to be an artist and writing this book. Because it's lonely to write these really hard stories. And so right now we offer a cohort that supports young writers working on their manuscript. I'd love to give a special shout out to Sonia Ahmed, who's actually here today and was one of the students. We also just provide mentorship and support. The idea is that you just do not have to be alone in this. And the literary arts, as we were talking before this, Rabia, it is where Islam and this rich culture begins. We began with intellect and writing and reading and philosophizing and the spiritual aspect. It wasn't always chemistry and astronomy. That came later, you know. So we want to bring back this tradition and support Muslim writers who want to hold on to who they are and still have the amazing craftsmanship in the very industry that often tries to write our stories for us. So it's been a fun ride at House of Amal.
Good. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. And thank you so much, Amal, again.
Jazakallah khair, everyone.
Okay, I think I'm gonna end the meeting now. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.